The summer evening at Windsor Castle carried the kind of electric atmosphere that only comes with grand royal celebrations. Tonight marked the Diamond Jubilee celebration, bringing together dignitaries, nobility, and carefully selected guests. From around the Commonwealth to honor 70 years of devoted service to the crown, the ancient walls of the castle were alive with music, laughter, and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses as hundreds of guests mingled in the state apartments. Among the royal guards, maintaining security throughout the castle was Lance Corporal Daniel Matthews, a 26-year-old soldier who had served in the household division for 4 years. Daniel had been specifically selected for tonight's duty because of his exemplary service record and his ability to maintain perfect discipline even in the most challenging circumstances. Standing at attention near the grand reception room, he embodied everything the royal guard represented: unwavering dedication, impeccable bearing, and absolute professionalism. The guests flowing past Daniel's position included some of the most powerful and influential people in the world: prime ministers, ambassadors, business leaders, and members of European royalty moved through the elegant rooms in their finest evening wear, many stopping to admire the precision and dignity of the guards who protected them. Among these distinguished guests was Lady Victoria Ashworth, 32-year-old socialite whose beauty was matched only by her reputation for scandal and controversy. Victoria came from an ancient noble family with connections to the royal household dating back centuries, but her personal life had been the subject of tabloid speculation for over a decade. Lady Victoria had married into wealth at 21, divorced spectacularly at 25, and had since made headlines for her romantic involvements with celebrities, politicians, and foreign dignitaries. Her presence at royal events was always carefully managed by palace protocol officers who understood that she brought both prestige and potential complications to any gathering. Tonight, Victoria wore a stunning midnight blue gown that had been designed by one of London's most exclusive fashion houses. Diamonds sparkled at her throat and ears, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers as she moved through the rooms. With the confident grace of someone who had been attending such events since childhood, but Victoria had not come to the celebration simply to socialize with other guests or to be photographed for society magazines. She had noticed Daniel Matthews during previous royal events and had become fascinated by his stoic professionalism and striking appearance. Unlike the men who usually surrounded her, wealthy but soft politicians and businessmen, Daniel represented something different: strength, honor, and an integrity that seemed impossible to compromise. Victoria had spent weeks planning her approach, studying the protocols and schedules that governed royal guard duties. She knew that Daniel would be stationed at his post for hours without relief, unable to move or respond to distractions no matter how compelling they might be. That level of discipline only made him more intriguing to someone who was accustomed to getting whatever she wanted through charm, beauty, or influence. As the evening progressed and the celebration reached its peak, Victoria began positioning herself near Daniel's post with increasing frequency. She would pause nearby to admire the artwork on the walls or engage in conversations with other guests, always ensuring that she remained within his peripheral vision. Daniel was aware of Lady Victoria's presence, as he was trained to notice everything that happened in his area of responsibility. Her reputation preceded her, and he had been briefed about notable guests who might require special attention from security personnel. However, his duty was to maintain his post and remain focused on potential security threats, not to acknowledge the social dynamics playing out around him. Victoria's first direct approach was subtle and seemingly innocent. During a brief lull in the crowd flow, she approached Daniel's position while pretending to examine a painting hung on the wall nearby. "This Gainsborough is absolutely magnificent, don't you think?" she said in her cultured accent, speaking just loudly enough for Daniel to hear clearly. "The way the light captures the subject's eyes is remarkably similar to your own intensity." Daniel maintained his forward gaze and military bearing, giving no indication that he had heard her comment. His training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. Guests who tried to engage guards in conversation were common, and the proper response was to remain professional and focused on duty. Undeterred by his lack of response, Victoria continued her commentary on the artwork while slowly moving closer to Daniel's position. "I've always admired men who possess such remarkable self-control," she said, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. "It must require tremendous strength to remain so perfectly disciplined." Other guests were beginning to notice Lady Victoria's behavior, whispering among themselves about her obvious interest in the handsome guard. Some found it amusing, others considered it inappropriate, but everyone was curious to see how the situation would develop. Daniel could feel the attention of the other guests focusing on him and Lady Victoria, which made maintaining his composure even more challenging. He knew that any reaction on his part would create exactly the kind of scene that could damage both his career and the dignity of the royal household. Victoria sensed that her subtle approach was not achieving the desired effect, so she decided to escalate her efforts. Moving even closer to Daniel's position, she began speaking in a voice that was meant to be heard only by him, but her words carried further than she intended. "I find myself wondering what it would take to see beyond that magnificent discipline of yours," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his face. "There must be passion beneath that perfect control, and I would very much like to discover it." The directness of her approach shocked the nearby guests, who had never witnessed such bold behavior at a royal function. Conversations began to quiet as people turned to observe the unprecedented scene of a member of the nobility attempting to seduce a royal guard in full view of hundreds of distinguished guests. Daniel felt his jaw tighten slightly as he realized that Lady Victoria was not going to be discouraged by his lack of response. The situation was escalating beyond anything covered in his training, and he knew that whatever happened next would be witnessed by some of the most influential people in the Commonwealth. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle had seen many dramatic moments throughout their long history, but what was about to unfold would become one of the most talked-about incidents in modern royal protocol. As Lady Victoria's advances became more obvious and persistent, the atmosphere in the grand reception room began to shift dramatically. Conversations gradually died down as more guests became aware of the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. The sight of a prominent member of the nobility attempting to seduce a royal guard during a major state celebration was unprecedented in modern royal history. Victoria seemed to thrive on the growing attention, interpreting the hushed whispers and stares as validation of her bold approach. She had always been someone who enjoyed being the center of attention, and the shocked reactions of the other guests only encouraged her to push further. "I'm staying at Claridge's tonight," she said to Daniel, her voice now clearly audible too. Several nearby guests, Suite 412. "I would be delighted to show you what lies beyond the walls of duty and protocol." The brazenness of her proposition sent a ripple of shock through the distinguished gathering. Several elderly ladies gasped audibly, while gentlemen exchanged uncomfortable glances and began murmuring disapproval of such inappropriate behavior at a royal function. Daniel maintained his military bearing despite feeling his heart rate increase under the pressure of the situation. His training had covered many scenarios, but nothing had prepared him for such a direct and public challenge to his professionalism. Every instinct told him to respond, but his oath as a royal guard demanded absolute discipline regardless of the circumstances. Major Patricia Weatherby, the senior protocol officer responsible for managing guest behavior during the celebration, had been monitoring the situation from across the room. As a veteran of dozens of royal events, she had dealt with difficult guests before, but Lady Victoria's conduct was crossing lines that threatened the dignity of the entire occasion. Major Weatherby began making her way through the crowd toward Daniel's position, her expression professional but firm. She understood that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent the situation from escalating further and causing embarrassment to the royal family. However, before Major Weatherby could reach them, Victoria made her most audacious move yet. She stepped directly in front of Daniel, blocking his line of sight and forcing him to either acknowledge her presence or risk appearing to stare directly at her. "I know you can hear me, and I know you're interested," she said with supreme confidence, reaching out to touch the brass button on his red tunic. "These uniforms are magnificent, but I imagine you're even more impressive without it." The physical contact crossed a clear boundary that transformed the situation from inappropriate flirtation to potential assault on a member of the royal security detail. Several guests gasped at Victoria's boldness, while others began pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a scandalous scene. Daniel felt Victoria's fingers on his uniform and knew that he had reached the point where his duty to maintain discipline was being directly challenged by his responsibility to maintain appropriate boundaries. The situation was spiraling beyond his ability to handle through passive resistance alone. At that moment, an unexpected voice cut through the tension like a sword through silk. "Lady Ashworth, I believe you may be lost." The voice belonged to Princess Anne, who had approached the scene with the quiet authority that came from decades of royal service and an innate understanding of how to handle difficult situations with grace and firmness. Victoria spun around, her face flushing red, as she realized that her behavior had attracted the attention of a senior member of the royal family. The confidence that had driven her bold advances immediately crumbled as she found an narrow self face-to-face with Princess Anne's stern disapproval. "Your Royal Highness," Victoria stammered, dropping into a hasty curtsy while trying to regain her composure. "I was just admiring the dedication of your guards." Princess Anne's expression remained coolly polite, but her tone carried unmistakable authority. "Indeed, their dedication to duty is remarkable, particularly their ability to maintain professionalism in the face of distractions." The word distractions was delivered with enough emphasis to make Victoria's inappropriate behavior crystal clear to everyone within hearing distance. Princess Anne had managed to acknowledge what had happened while simultaneously putting Victoria firmly in her place without causing a public scene. "Perhaps you would join me for a private word about the evening's arrangements," Princess Anne continued, making it clear that this was not a request, but a royal command. "I believe Major Weatherby has some information about the schedule that might interest you." Victoria realized that she was being diplomatically but firmly removed from the situation. Any attempt to resist or argue would only make her behavior more scandalous and could result in her being permanently banned from future royal events. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Victoria replied, her earlier boldness replaced by the deference that royal protocol demanded. "I would be honored." As Princess Anne escorted Victoria away from Daniel's position, the crowd of observers began to disperse. Though conversations buzzed with excited commentary about what they had just witnessed, the incident would undoubtedly become the subject of speculation and gossip for months to come. Daniel remained at his post, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the extraordinary circumstances he had just endured. However, those who knew him well could see the slight tension in his shoulders that indicated the stress he had been under during Victoria's persistent advances. Major Weatherby paused briefly near Daniel's position as she followed Princess Anne. "And Victoria's excellent composure, Lance Corporal Matthews," she said quietly. "Professionalism reflects great credit on the regiment." The validation from his superior officer helped Daniel understand that his handling of the situation had been appropriate and that his career had not been damaged by circumstances beyond his control. However, he knew that the incident would likely follow him throughout his service and beyond, in a private anteroom away from the celebration. Princess Anne was having a very different conversation with Lady Victoria. The royal demeanor remained polite but firm as she addressed the behavior that had shocked the distinguished gathering. "Victoria, your family has served the crown with distinction for generations," Princess Anne began. "Your conduct tonight has been unworthy of that heritage and disrespectful to a soldier who cannot defend himself while performing his duties." Victoria's earlier confidence had completely evaporated as she faced the consequences of her actions. "Your Royal Highness, I sincerely apologize. I fear I may have had too much champagne and allowed my admiration for the guard's dedication to become inappropriate." The excuse was weak, and both women knew it. Victoria's behavior had been calculated and persistent, not the result of momentary poor judgment or excessive alcohol consumption. Princess Anne's response was measured but decisive. "Your presence at tonight's celebration is no longer welcome. Major Weatherby will escort you to your transportation. Furthermore, your invitation to future royal events will be reconsidered based on your ability to demonstrate appropriate respect for royal protocol and the men and women who serve the crown. The implications of Princess Anne's words were clear. Victoria's behavior had consequences that would extend far beyond this single evening. Her place in royal social circles was now in jeopardy, and her reputation would suffer permanent damage from her failed attempt to seduce a royal guard. As Lady Victoria was escorted from Windsor Castle in disgrace, the ripple effects of her scandalous behavior began spreading throughout the celebration and beyond. The distinguished guests who had witnessed her brazen attempt to seduce Lance Corporal Matthews were already sharing the story with others, and by the time the evening concluded, virtually everyone at the Diamond Jubilee celebration knew about the unprecedented incident. Major Weatherby accompanied Victoria to her waiting car, with the professional efficiency of someone who had handled difficult situations before, but even her extensive experience had not prepared her for such a blatant violation of royal protocol. As Victoria's limousine disappeared into the London night, Weatherby knew that the ramifications of the evening would extend far beyond a single embarrassing incident. Back inside the castle, the celebration continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Guests found themselves drawn into discussions about what they had witnessed, with opinions ranging from outrage at Victoria's behavior to sympathy for the guard who would maintain such remarkable composure under extraordinary pressure. Lord Christopher Pemberton, a longtime friend of the royal family who had known Victoria since childhood, expressed the feelings of many when he commented to his dinner companions, "I've known Victoria Ashworth her entire life, and while she's always been willful and attention-seeking, tonight's behavior was beyond anything I could have imagined." That poor guard handled himself with remarkable dignity. The immediate concern for palace officials was managing the potential media coverage of the incident. In the age of social media and instant communication, they knew that news of Victoria's behavior would likely reach the press within hours, possibly accompanied by photographs or video footage captured by other guests. Private Secretary to the Princess Royal, James Morrison, immediately began coordinating with the palace communications team to prepare for media inquiries. "We need to be ready with a statement that acknowledges the incident without giving it more attention than necessary," he advised. "Our focus should be on praising the professionalism of our security personnel rather than dwelling on the inappropriate behavior of a single guest." Meanwhile, Daniel Matthews continued his duties for the remainder of the evening, though he was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations surrounding him. Fellow guards who heard about the incident from their posts throughout the castle looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and admiration for the way he had handled such an unprecedented challenge. Sergeant Major William Hayes, Daniel's commanding officer, made a point of speaking with him during a brief break in duties. "Matthews, I want you to know that your conduct tonight has been exemplary. What that woman put you through was completely inappropriate, and your response demonstrates exactly the kind of character we expect from the Royal Guard." The validation from his superior was important for Daniel, who had been questioning whether he could have handled the situation differently. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. I was concerned that my lack of response might have been seen as encouraging her behavior." Hayes shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. Any other response would have been inappropriate and potentially damaging too. Both your career and the reputation of the regiment, you did exactly what your training and oath required, even under extremely difficult circumstances." As the evening's celebration wound down and the distinguished guests began departing, Princess Anne took time to personally thank several of the guards who had served during the event. When she reached Daniel's position, her words carried special significance given the events of the evening. "Lance Corporal Matthews, your professionalism tonight exemplified the finest traditions of the Royal Guard," she said with genuine appreciation. "The way you maintained your composure and dignity under such trying circumstances reflects great credit on yourself and your unit." Her personal acknowledgement meant more to Daniel than any official commendation could have. Knowing that he had handled the situation appropriately in the eyes of a senior member of the royal family gave him confidence that his career would not be negatively affected by circumstances beyond his control. However, the broader implications of the evening were just beginning to unfold. By the following morning, several London newspapers had received tips about the incident from guests who had witnessed Victoria's behavior. the story was too sensational to ignore, particularly given Victoria's previous reputation and the unprecedented nature of her conduct at a royal function. The Daily Telegraph ran the headline: "Socialite scandalizes royal celebration with brazen advance on guard," while the Times took a more reserved approach with "Protocol breach mars Diamond Jubilee event." The tabloids were far less restrained, with The Sun leading with "Lady tries to seduce palace guard gets royal boot." The media coverage brought unwanted attention to Daniel, who found himself thrust into the public spotlight despite having done nothing but perform his duties with exceptional professionalism. Photographers gathered outside his London flat, hoping to capture images of the guard who had become famous for maintaining his discipline in the face of seduction. Victoria, meanwhile, found herself facing consequences that extended far beyond the immediate embarrassment of being escorted from the celebration. Her behavior had been witnessed by hundreds of influential people, many of whom had business or social connections that could affect her future opportunities. The charitable organizations she had supported began quietly distancing themselves from her, concerned that her scandalous reputation might damage their own standing. Social invitations from prominent families dried up, and several business partnerships that had been under discussion were suddenly put on indefinite hold. Most significantly, the Lord Chamberlain's office, which managed royal household affairs and guest lists, began a formal review of Victoria's status for future royal events. The process was conducted with typical royal discretion, but the message was clear: her behavior had consequences that would affect her access to the highest levels of British society. Lady Victoria's mother, the Dowager Lady Ashworth, was mortified by her daughter's behavior and the damage it had done to the family's reputation. In a private meeting at the family's London residence, she expressed her disappointment in terms that left no doubt about the severity of the situation. "Victoria, our family has served the crown with distinction for over 3 centuries," the elderly lady said with obvious pain in her voice. "Your conduct at Windsor Castle has brought shame upon a name that has been honored throughout British history. The consequences of your behavior will affect not just you, but future generations of our family." The weight of her mother's words, combined with the rapidly mounting social and professional consequences of her actions, finally forced Victoria to confront the reality of what she had done. Her attempt to seduce a royal guard had not only failed spectacularly, but it also destroyed much of the social standing she had taken for granted throughout her life. In the days following the incident, Victoria attempted to rehabilitate her image through carefully crafted public statements expressing regret for her behavior. However, the damage had been done, and the British public's reaction was overwhelmingly negative towards someone who had disrespected both a serviceman performing his duties and the institution of the monarchy itself. The incident became a cautionary tale about the importance of respecting boundaries and understanding that some institutions and individuals were not appropriate targets for personal desires or ambitions. Victoria had learned, too late, that there were consequences for treating people as objects for her entertainment, rather than as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. 2 weeks after the Diamond Jubilee incident, the story had taken on a life of its own in both traditional media and social networks around the world. What had begun as a scandal confined to British high society had become an international symbol of privilege, entitlement, and the importance of respecting those who serve their country with honor. Lance Corporal Daniel Matthews found himself in the uncomfortable position of being celebrated as a hero for simply doing his job. Letters poured into Windsor Castle from around the world, praising his professionalism and discipline. Veterans organizations, women's rights groups, and military families all expressed their admiration for the way he had handled Victoria's inappropriate advances. One letter that particularly moved Daniel came from a young woman serving in the U.S. Army. "Your example shows that military personnel can maintain their dignity and professionalism even when faced with harassment and inappropriate behavior. Thank you for demonstrating that strength comes from character, not from responding to provocation." The international attention had unexpected consequences for the Royal Guard as an institution. Military academies around the world began using Daniel's response as a case study in maintaining professional standards under pressure. The incident had inadvertently highlighted the exceptional training and character required to serve in such visible positions of responsibility. Colonel Sarah Richardson, who oversaw Royal Guard training programs, found herself fielding requests from military organizations globally who wanted to understand how British soldiers were prepared for such challenging situations. The Matthews incident has shown the world that our guards are not just ceremonial figures, she explained to a gathering of international military attaches. They are highly trained professionals who embody the highest standards of military bearing and personal integrity. Meanwhile, Lady Victoria's attempts to rebuild her reputation were meeting with limited success. Her public apology, issued through her solicitor, had been carefully crafted to express regret without admitting to any intentional wrongdoing. Lady Ashworth deeply regrets any misunderstanding that may have occurred during the Diamond Jubilee celebration. She has the utmost respect for the Royal Guard and the important service they provide to the Crown. However, the British public was not easily mauled by what many saw as a non-apology that failed to take responsibility for her deliberate and persistent harassment of a serviceman who could not defend himself. Opinion polls showed that over 80% of respondents viewed her behavior as unacceptable and believed she should face more serious consequences. The social ostracism Victoria faced was swift and comprehensive. Invitations to charity galas, society weddings, and cultural events that had once filled her calendar disappeared entirely. The exclusive London clubs where she had been a fixture suddenly found reasons to be fully booked when she attempted to make reservations most painfully for Victoria. Several of her longtime friends began distancing themselves from her, concerned that association with someone who had become synonymous with entitled bad behavior would damage their own reputations. Phone calls went unreturned, and social media connections were quietly severed as her former circle of friends protected themselves from the scandal. The financial implications of her behavior were also becoming apparent. Several business ventures that had relied on her social connections and access to exclusive events began to collapse as doors previously open to her were firmly closed. Her lifestyle, which had depended on maintaining her position in high society, was no longer sustainable. Victoria's ex-husband, Lord James Ashworth, who had maintained a cordial relationship with her despite their acrimonious divorce, felt compelled to issue a public statement distancing himself from her actions. While I have great respect for Victoria as the mother of our children, I cannot support or condone behavior that shows such disregard for the men and women who serve our country. The statement from her ex-husband was particularly damaging because it came from someone who knew her well and had no obvious motive for attacking her publicly. His words carried weight with those who might have been inclined to view the incident as a misunderstanding or momentary lapse in judgment. Daniel, meanwhile, was struggling with the unwanted attention his professionalism had brought him. He had joined the Royal Guard to serve his country quietly and with dignity, not to become a public figure or symbol of military virtue. The constant media attention was making it difficult for him to perform his duties normally. Recognizing the challenges Daniel faced, his commanding officers made the decision to temporarily reassign him to duties that would give him some respite from public scrutiny. The assignment to the Royal Protection Command would allow him to continue his service while working in roles that were less visible to the media and general public. Matthews, your conduct during the Windsor incident has brought great credit to the regiment, Colonel Michael Thompson informed him during the reassignment briefing. This new assignment will allow you to continue serving while the public attention dies down. Your professionalism and character make you exactly the kind of soldier we need in protection duties. The reassignment was presented as a promotion in recognition of his exceptional service, though Daniel understood that it was also designed to protect him from the ongoing media circus surrounding the incident. He was grateful for the consideration his superiors were showing and relieved to be moving to a role that would allow him to focus on his military duties rather than managing public attention. Princess Anne, who had handled the original incident with such grace and authority, took a personal interest in ensuring that Daniel's career was not negatively affected by circumstances beyond his control. She had seen how military personnel could be unfairly impacted by media attention and was determined to ensure someone who had served with such distinction not suffer professionally. During a private meeting with senior military officials, Princess Anne made her views clear. Lance Corporal Matthews demonstrated exactly the kind of character and professionalism we expect from our service members. His career should be enhanced, not hindered, by the way he handled an impossible situation. With such dignity, her royal endorsement carried enormous weight within military circles and ensured that Daniel's future assignments and promotion opportunities would not be compromised by the unwanted notoriety he had gained through no fault of his own. The incident also sparked broader discussions about the treatment of military personnel and the importance of protecting those who serve their country from harassment and inappropriate behavior. Women's rights organizations pointed out that what Victoria had done to Daniel would have been clearly recognized as sexual harassment if the roles had been reversed, and they called for equal standards in protecting all service members from such treatment. Military families began organizing to support Daniel and to highlight the challenges faced by service members, who must maintain professional standards even when dealing with inappropriate civilian behavior. Their advocacy helped shift public discussion from the scandal itself to the broader issues of respect and appropriate treatment of military personnel. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the incident had created lasting changes in how royal events were managed and how military personnel were protected from inappropriate guest behavior. New protocols were established to provide better support for guards who faced difficult situations, and training programs were enhanced to prepare personnel for a wider range of challenging scenarios. The story that had begun with one woman's inappropriate behavior had evolved into a broader conversation about respect, duty, and the character required to serve others with honor and dignity. 6 months after the Windsor Castle incident, the full scope of the consequences became clear as both Daniel Matthews and Lady Victoria Ashworth found their lives permanently altered by those few dramatic minutes during the Diamond Jubilee celebration. Daniel had settled into his new role with the Royal Protection Command, where his exceptional character and proven ability to handle pressure made him invaluable in protecting members of the royal family during public engagements. His experience with managing difficult situations while maintaining perfect composure had marked him as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive security assignments. The skills he had demonstrated during Victoria's harassment attempt, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, maintain situational awareness while being personally targeted, and uphold professional standards despite provocation, were exactly what protection officers needed when dealing with crowds, protesters, and unpredictable situations. Matthews has become one of our most reliable officers, reported Chief Inspector David Wells, who supervised the Royal Protection Detail. The incident at Windsor demonstrated that he has the temperament and judgment needed for the most challenging protection assignments. Daniel's reputation within military circles had been enhanced rather than damaged by the incident. His story was being used in training programs across multiple branches of the armed forces as an example of how to maintain professional integrity. When faced with harassment or inappropriate advances, military personnel around the world had embraced Daniel as a symbol of the values they were sworn to uphold. His refusal to be swayed by temptation or to compromise his duty, even when faced with a beautiful and persistent woman, resonated with service members who understood the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between personal desires and professional responsibilities. The incident had also sparked important conversations about the harassment military personnel faced, particularly those in highly visible ceremonial roles. Many guards came forward to share their own experiences with inappropriate behavior from tourists and guests, leading to improved support systems and clearer protocols for handling such situations. Lady Victoria, meanwhile, had discovered that the consequences of her actions extended far beyond temporary embarrassment. The social exile she faced had destroyed the lifestyle that had defined her adult life, forcing her to confront who she was beyond her position in high society. Her attempts to rebuild her reputation through charity, work, and public service were met with skepticism from organizations that questioned whether her involvement was genuine or simply an attempt at damage control. The stigma of being known as the woman who had harassed a royal guard followed her wherever she tried to establish new connections. The financial impact of her social exile had been severe. business ventures that depended on her connections too. Wealthy and influential circles had collapsed, leaving her facing serious financial difficulties for the first time in her life. The comfortable lifestyle she had maintained through divorce settlements and family money was no longer sufficient to support her previous standard of living. More painfully, the incident had affected her relationship with her two teenage children, who were old enough to understand the nature of their mother's behavior and its implications. Both had expressed embarrassment about her actions and concerns about how the scandal might affect their own futures. "Mummy, how could you do something so awful to someone who was just doing his job?" her 15-year-old daughter, Emma, had asked during a tearful confrontation. "Everyone at school is talking about it, and I don't know how to defend you, because what you did was wrong." The disappointment of her children cut deeper than any social rejection or financial consequence Victoria had faced. She began to understand that her pursuit of excitement and attention had not only damaged her own life, but had also harmed the people she loved most. In a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her reputation, Victoria made the decision to reach out directly to Daniel through official channels. She hoped that a personal apology, delivered with genuine remorse, might begin to repair some of the damage her behavior had caused. Her request for a meeting was handled through military protocol officers, who consulted with Daniel about whether he wanted any contact with the woman who had put him through such an ordeal. After careful consideration and discussions with his superiors, Daniel agreed to a brief formal meeting in the presence of military officials. The meeting took place in a conference room at the Ministry of Defense, with Colonel Thompson and a military advocate present to ensure that the interaction remained appropriate and professional. Victoria arrived looking very different from the confident socialite who had commanded attention at Windsor Castle. She appeared nervous, subdued, and genuinely remorseful. "Lance Corporal Matthews," Victoria began, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to express my sincere apology for my behavior at the Diamond Jubilee celebration. What I did was inexcusable. I understand now that my actions constituted harassment of a serviceman who could not defend himself while performing his duties." Daniel listened to her apology with the same professional composure he had maintained. During her original advances, though, he could see that her remorse appeared genuine. "Lady Ashworth, I accept your apology," he replied formally. "I hope that lessons learned from this incident will help prevent similar situations in the future." Victoria continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I want you to know that I never considered how my behavior might affect you personally or professionally. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I deeply regret any distress I may have caused you." The meeting lasted only 15 minutes, but it provided some closure for both parties. Daniel appreciated Victoria's willingness to take full responsibility for her actions without making excuses. While Victoria was able to deliver the apology that had been weighing on her conscience for months, Colonel Thompson observed the interaction with professional interest, noting how both parties handled themselves with dignity despite the awkward circumstances. This meeting demonstrates the importance of accountability and the possibility of redemption. "Even after serious mistakes," he commented afterward. Following the meeting, Victoria began a genuine effort to rebuild her life around service to others rather than seeking attention for herself. She quietly began volunteering at organizations that supported military families, working in roles that kept her away from public attention while allowing her to contribute something meaningful. Her work with military charities was initially met with suspicion, but over time her consistent service and evident sincerity began to change perceptions. She learned about the sacrifices made by military families and developed a deeper understanding of the honor and duty that people like Daniel embodied in their service. Victoria has shown genuine commitment to understanding and supporting military families, reported Sarah Morrison, director of one of the charities where Victoria volunteered. Her past mistakes don't define her future contributions, and she's working hard to make amends through service rather than publicity. The transformation was slow and often painful, but Victoria gradually began to find purpose and meaning in helping others rather than seeking attention for herself. The scandal that had destroyed her old life had also created an opportunity for her to discover who she could become when not defined by wealth and social position. Daniel? Meanwhile, continued to serve with distinction, earning commendations for his professional excellence and eventually being selected for specialized training that would advance his career significantly. The incident that could have ended his military service had instead highlighted his exceptional character and opened doors to new opportunities. The story of their brief but dramatic encounter had evolved from a scandal into a complex narrative about consequences, redemption, and the possibility of learning from serious mistakes. 2 years after the infamous Diamond Jubilee incident, both Daniel Matthews and Lady Victoria Ashworth had become symbols of transformation and redemption. Though their journeys had taken very different paths, the scandal that had once dominated headlines and social media discussions had evolved into a powerful story about the consequences of actions and the possibility of genuine change. Daniel had been promoted to corporal and was now serving as a training instructor at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, where his experience had made him uniquely qualified to prepare future officers for the challenges they would face in high-profile military positions. His story had become part of the curriculum used to teach cadets about maintaining professional integrity under extreme pressure. The Matthews incident, as it was now known in military training circles, was studied not just in Britain, but in military academies around the world. His response to Victoria's advances had become a textbook example of how to handle inappropriate civilian behavior while maintaining the dignity and honor expected of military personnel. Standing before a class of eager young cadets, Daniel shared the lessons he had learned that night at Windsor Castle. Service members, particularly those in ceremonial or high-visibility roles, will face situations that test not just their physical courage, but their moral courage as well, he explained. To his attentive audience, the true test of a soldier's character comes not in battle, but in moments when no one would blame you for taking the easy path instead of the right one. The cadets listened with rapt attention, knowing they were hearing from someone who had faced the ultimate test of military discipline and emerged with his honor intact. Many of them would go on to serve in positions where they would remember Daniel's example when facing their own moments of temptation or pressure. His influence extended beyond the military as well. Veterans organizations had embraced Daniel as a spokesperson for issues affecting service members, particularly the importance of protecting military personnel from harassment and inappropriate behavior. His calm, professional manner and obvious sincerity made him an effective advocate for causes he had never expected to champion. Corporal Matthews has shown us that heroism isn't always about charging into battle, said General Sir Patrick Sanders during a speech at a military appreciation dinner. Sometimes the greatest courage is shown by standing still, maintaining your principles, and refusing to compromise your integrity regardless of the temptation or pressure you face. Meanwhile, Victoria's transformation had been equally dramatic but much more private. After 2 years of consistent volunteer work with military charities and veterans organizations, she had earned the respect of people who had initially viewed her involvement with deep skepticism. Her work was not glamorous or attention-seeking. She spent her days helping military spouses find employment, assisting veterans with disability claims, and providing support to families dealing with deployment stress. The woman who had once thrived on being the center of attention now found fulfillment in serving others without recognition or praise. Lady Ashworth has become one of our most dedicated volunteers, reported Colonel James Harrison, director of the Veteran Support Foundation. She arrives early, stays late, and never seeks credit for her contributions. Her transformation has been remarkable to witness. Victoria's children had begun to see their mother in a new light as well. Her daughter Emma, now 17, had written a school essay about personal growth that featured her mother's journey from scandal to service. My mother made a terrible mistake that hurt someone and embarrassed our family, Emma wrote. But instead of making excuses or running away from the consequences, she chose to learn from her mistake and dedicate herself to helping others. She taught me that your worst moment doesn't have to define who you become, the essay which was later published in a national magazine. It's provided a different perspective on the scandal that had captivated the public's attention 2 years earlier. It showed how one person's poor choices could ultimately lead to positive change if they were willing to accept responsibility and worked to make amends. Victoria's financial situation had stabilized as well, though at a much more modest level than her previous lifestyle. She had sold her London townhouse and expensive possessions, using the proceeds to establish a foundation that provided emergency financial assistance to military families facing hardship. The Ashworth Military Family Support Foundation operated quietly and efficiently, helping hundreds of families without seeking publicity or recognition. Victoria's personal involvement in running the foundation meant that she understood intimately the challenges faced by military families and could provide assistance that was both practical and compassionate. Her work brought her into contact with many of Daniel's fellow service members, and she gradually earned their respect through her genuine commitment to supporting military families. The initial hostility and suspicion she had faced from military communities had been replaced by grudging admiration for her sincere efforts to make amends. On the second anniversary of the Windsor Castle incident, both Daniel and Victoria found themselves invited to the same military charity gala, though neither knew the other would be attending. The event was honoring individuals who had made significant contributions to supporting military personnel and their families. Daniel was being recognized for his work, training future officers, and his advocacy for service members facing harassment. Victoria was receiving an award for her foundation's work supporting military families, though she had initially tried to decline the recognition. When they encountered each other at the reception, the meeting was brief but significant. 2 years of personal growth and service had given both of them perspective on the incident that had changed both their lives. "Corporal Matthews," Victoria said quietly, "I hope you know that what happened that night led to the most important learning experience of my life. Your example of dignity and service has inspired me to try to become a better person." Daniel responded with the same graciousness that had characterized his behavior throughout the ordeal. "Lady Ashworth, the work you've done with military families shows that people can grow and change. Your foundation has helped many people who needed support." Their brief conversation was observed by several attendees who recognized the significance of the moment. The woman who had once tried to seduce a royal guard and the soldier who had maintained his integrity, despite her advances, were now both dedicated to serving military families and supporting those who served their country. The incident that had begun as a scandal about privilege and inappropriate behavior had evolved into a story about redemption, service, and the possibility of positive change, even after serious mistakes. Both Daniel and Victoria had found their true calling through the consequences of that dramatic night at Windsor Castle. Years later, when military historians wrote about the significant events in Royal Guard history, the Matthews incident would be remembered not as a scandal, but as a pivotal moment that led to important changes in how military personnel were protected and supported, and how individuals could find redemption through service to others. Daniel continued his military career with distinction, eventually rising to senior leadership positions where his experience and character made him an influential voice in military training and development. Victoria dedicated the rest of her life to supporting military families, never again seeking the spotlight, but finding deep satisfaction in service that honored rather than exploited those who served their country, the kingdom that had once been. Speechless at Victoria's brazen behavior ultimately found itself inspired by the transformation of both individuals involved, proving that even the most scandalous incidents could lead to positive change when people chose growth over excuses and service over self-interest. Their story became a testament to the power of taking responsibility for one's actions and the possibility of redemption through genuine service to others, showing that no mistake is too great to overcome if someone is willing to do the hard work of becoming a better person.